So in this lab we're going to be burning magnesium oxide, but it's a stoichiometric lab, so we want to actually keep really good track of how much magnesium oxide is made, how much magnesium we start with, so we're really careful about a lot of things. What we're going to be using in this lab is called a crucible. A crucible, same thing as in the English play that you read when you're juniors, I think. If you're sophomore, you may not know what I'm talking about. But this is a crucible. It is used to heat chemicals up to very high temperatures. It's ceramic. And these are crucible tongs. There are very specific ways to use crucible tongs. They're made with to be used with one hand. And the way that you manipulate a crucible is in two steps. First of all, you generally will, if you want to put a crucible into a apparatus, we're going to set it up here. We're going to light a Bunsen burner underneath this ring stand and this iron ring, and we're going to heat this crucible, so we need to get it up into the clay triangle. Now, a note about clay triangles. The clay triangles come in a couple of different sizes. You can see that the one on your right is a little bit bigger than the one on your left, and that's kind of important. They'll both fit onto this ring just fine. They'll both fit. They can both lay there. However, if we try to put the small crucible, they come in different sizes, onto the large ring, you'll see it'll fall right through, and that's a problem. We don't want to do that. So before you do anything, get anything hot at all, you want to make sure that your crucible fits in your clay triangle, which that one does not. This one does. Here's a larger one, and so that one will catch there. The other thing, so whenever I did that, you probably didn't notice it, but actually this doesn't quite fit. I shouldn't use that one. I need a little bit bigger one. I'll actually go ahead and use it. Fits, but I can't actually pick it up. I'm going to use this smaller one. So the way that you manipulate a crucible is the pointers go up on the end. You go around and fully close the crucible around that little opening part, and then you pick it up. And then you take it over to the clay triangle, which this is the smaller clay triangle, so I'm okay. And then you just open it up and let it slide right in. Then to pick up the lid of the crucible, you turn it over, point down. For the lid, you go down, and there'll be a little knob on the top that you pick up and you put on top. Now, don't spend a long time looking for the right fitting lid. The lids are all oversized. That's on purpose. You don't want them to have a real tight fit, because we're going to burn things in these. We need oxygen to be able to get in and out. So the lids will be oversized. They're just to kind of keep things from flaming out. So before you do anything, you need to show your teacher that you can put a crucible onto a clay triangle and the lid, and take it off, because when it's hot you're not going to be able to use your fingers. So you take it off, lid first, turn these over, pick this up like so, set it down, and then if necessary you can put the lid back on. So that is how you will use your crucible. Now the very first thing you got to do before we can even put our stuff in there, our magnesium that we're going to burn, is we're going to need to get it dry. Now it doesn't look wet, it's not going to be wet, but ceramics are hygroscopic. They'll suck moisture in from the air around them, and so this actually weighs a little bit more than it should right now because it's got a little moisture in it. So the first thing we want to do before we do anything else is heat this up for about 2 or 3 minutes over a burner flame. And so we're going to go ahead and start our burner flame, and then I'll come back and we'll see what to do next in a few minutes. So now this is heated for just a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, just enough to get it nice and hot. I've turned off the flame, and now I'm going to take the lid off, and I'm going to take the crucible off, and I'm actually going to let it sit and cool for a few minutes, because I want it to not be super hot. I want it to be dry, but I don't want it to be super hot. If it's too hot, the convection currents that it creates when it's on this electronic balance will actually cause the weight to alter a little bit. So we want to let it sit for about a minute or 2 minutes. This is actually not hot. I didn't really do it. I was just kidding. So I don't have to wait. So it's actually cool to the touch. So I'm going to get my weight, my mass now, not of just the crucible, but also of the lid. And I'm going to record that where it says massive crucible and lid. And it doesn't matter what that says, yours will be different. The other thing I should probably point out, if you look inside the crucible, the inside of the crucible is filthy. This has been done a whole bunch of times. That doesn't matter. That's okay, because that's all a bunch of ash, which is not going to change as we go through the reaction, so we're going to be okay. So the next thing I do, now that I have my crucible and my lid on here, I've recorded that, I then want to get a piece of magnesium. And the magnesium needs to be about 2 inches. It doesn't have to be exactly 2 inches. We don't want to spend a long time measuring it. Just about 2 inches, just so we don't use a lot more than we need to. So, and magnesium's fairly pliable, so you can pretty much just twist it off with your fingernails, like I just did. And so I'm going to need to wind this up. Just kind of wind it around my pinky, not too tightly. If it's too wound too tightly, it's not going to burn very easily. So I'm going to kind of wind it around my pinky, and then I'm going to, oh my, why did that turn off? That's not good. Okay. So I've got my crucible measured. I've recorded the mass of the crucible and lid. I've got my little magnesium ribbon, and I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to record the mass of that magnesium ribbon, of the entire, the ribbon, the crucible, and the lid all together on a line. And once I've got all that, I've recorded that, I've written it down, I'm ready to begin my burn. So you set it over there, and then you are going to light it, and you're not going to see much happen for about 5 or 6 minutes. So now we're going to do our check on the magnesium to see if it's begun burning, to see if it needs any more oxygen. So what we're going to do is we're going to just lift the lid very, 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 very briefly, see if anything at all comes out. Oh, and I don't know if you caught that on the camera there, but it did smoke up whenever I did that, and that smoke is magnesium oxide leaving, which we do not want to happen. We don't want to lose that. So just to show you, here's a thing to not do. Let me show you what happens if you do take the lid off and leave it off. It will flare up, and you see how we're losing all of that product. But opening, closing the lid will tamp out the fire. Opening it will cause it to flare up. What we're doing is adding oxygen. So we'll kind of peek at it to see, but the second we see any smoke at all coming out like that, we'll go ahead and put the lid back on, and we'll wait a while, wait a good 3 or 4 or 5 minutes before we open it again to see if it's completely combusted. So after a few minutes, you'll see when you do this, the bottom of the crucible gets incredibly hot. Ceramic being very high temperatures, big bright orange, the entire base of the bottom is. And so what you'll want to do now is you want to check after it's been 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 minutes. You think maybe it's maybe done. What you want to do is you want to check, and the way that you check to see if it's done is you lift the lid. Now when you lift the lid, you got to lift it very, very briefly, very, very carefully, and you got to set it down right away. What you want to look for is, does a big puff of white smoke start to come out? Do you see something start to flare up? If you do, you want to immediately set it right back down. So like, here's how long you should lift it for the first time. Okay, so I don't know if you noticed, but very little happened. Nothing came out. There wasn't a big puff of flame, wasn't a big puff of smoke. So I think, so it didn't. So now we're going to go a little longer and see if anything happens. And so I'm waiting a few minutes. Now you can kind of look inside there, and you can see that I'm going to set the lid down because nothing seems to be happening. You can see that the magnesium has changed. It's no longer looks like magnesium. It looks more like cigarette ash or something. It's that white, white, ashy kind of consistency. And whenever that happens, when you get to this point, you lift the lid. The reason that it would flare up is this lid is withholding oxygen. This time it didn't because it was all done. But sometimes it'll get hot enough that it's ready to burn, but there's no oxygen in there to burn it with. And so if you lift the lid, that allows oxygen to get in, it'll flare up. And that's what you want to be careful of, because one, it's a little dangerous, and two, when it flares up and that smoke goes out, you're losing, that smoke is the magnesium oxide. It's the product that you're trying to measure when you're done, so you don't want to lose it. And so if it does start to glow or anything like that, cover it back up, wait about a minute, 60, 90 seconds, and then look again. And what you're looking for is for that point where you can kind of lift the lid and nothing happens and it looks like it's all burned. So if we get to that point, we can go ahead and turn off the gas, turn off the burner, and I'd kind of let it sit on there for a minute or two, and then after a minute or two you can take it off and let it cool an additional minute or two, and then you're going to go weigh it and the lid, and that's the mass of your final product, crucible and lid, and from there we can record that and we can do our stoichiometric calculations. Once you've measured that, once you've found the mass of the lid and the crucible and the product, and you've got that all written down and it's cooled to the touch, you take about 5-10, they cool off pretty quickly, about 5 minutes or so it'll cool off. What you can do then, you can just dump the magnesium oxide in the trash. It's kind of like a cigarette ash at that point. It's not cigarettes, obviously, it's magnesium ash, but it's the same sort of idea. You can throw it into the trash at safe disposal for magnesium oxide. And then we are pretty well done. You can take down your apparatus and you're ready to start with your calculations.